Hello, my darlings, and welcome to day 3 of Advent Adventure. And today I bring you the day after tomorrow. Yes, it may be freezing outside, but spare a thought for the poor souls of this novel by Whitley Strieber. First published on January the 1st, 2004, it is almost 21 years old. Roland Emmerich and Jeffrey Nachmaninoff, I think I said his name right, made it into a very wonderful film with Dennis Quaid and Jake Gyllenhaal. I think that's how I've got the right characters. Anyway, yeah, there we go. Well, we all know the premise of the story, and if we don't, I will soon explain. We are heading into a catastrophic ice age. Not in a million years, but in a million hours. Absolutely. Everything about this book is on steroids. The entire novelization of the movie, and that's what this is. Whitley Strieber, yes, I know you wrote it, and I know that Roland made it. Either the book was true to the movie or the movie was true to the book. Either way, it's a cracking read and a fantastic film. Yes, there is so much wrong with it scientifically. It's like make your eyeballs spin in your head. But bear that in mind, it does make for a good disaster flick, and everybody loves a disaster flick. Everybody loves an end of the world disaster, and you don't get much more end of the world with a sudden ice age hitting the entire Northern Hemisphere. I'll read you the blurb on the back. The planet is warming up and the ice caps melt. The great currents of the oceans shift and the Northern Hemisphere is plunged into a new ice age. One scientist has the key to turning back the clock on global warming. But as Western civilization succumbs to blizzards and tidal waves, and the population of the Northern Hemisphere begins a mass exodus south, mankind's only saviour is making a lonely, terror-filled trip north. To New York, disappearing under snowdrifts hundreds of feet high, the city where his son was last heard of. Yes, we all know the wonderful, adorable Jack Hall. He's your main protagonist throughout all of this, and he's going to find his son, Sam. Sam, who decided that he was going to join a quiz team with his school and go to New York for the heats and the finals and whatever. And while he's there, he's trying to impress a really hot chick, whose name escapes me right now, but she's really hot. I think Emily Rossum plays her in the movie. Oh, but good Lord, can I think about what her name is? Oh, no. 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 Sorry. I'm afraid. No, I can't remember her name. Anyway, doesn't she's really not the main character, and Jack Hall is, and Sam. And it's about a love story between a father and a son. And the dad loves his son and will go to the ends of the earth to rescue his boy. And Sam, trying to impress the girl, shouldn't have stayed in New York, but he did. And now his dad's got to risk life and limb to get there to save his ass. Yes. So thanks, Sam. You've just put your dad, oh, your poor dad. And yeah, and that's what this whole story is about. It's his dad's quest to find his son Sam, and all the journey and horrible things that he has to go through in order to get there. And bearing that in mind inside the book, and you just think that would be all it's about, but no, it's actually not just a love letter from a father to a son, but it's the demise of us. Now, yesterday I did The World in Winter, which showed the decimation of us as a human race, but from the Brits' point of view. Well, this one is the demise of the human race from an American's point of view. Although it does encompass all of the world, if you like, and we do have connections to different countries, obviously, that are all being affected by the coming ice age. Not 1,000 of years, but thousands of minutes. Yes, it will be soon on your doorstep. I hope not, because if this book is anything to go by, and the previous one that I did yesterday, the human race does not have it looking good. The human race is just about to meet its maker and go off to join the choir invisible. Yeah, there are some memorable parts within this novel, of which I'm just going to read you a couple because they are fun. LA had recorded over 600 accidents in the fog of the past 24 hours. 11 fools had been pounded to bits by their own surfboards, and the cliffs in front of the Santa Monica were being eaten by surf that wasn't even starting to get tired when it slammed into them. Tommy was on the story, clutching his mic in the wind, staring into the minicam. This was what it was all about. A story like this. Behind him, he knew surfers were still working the waves, madmen, all of them. These waves were even bigger than I imagined them, he gushed. Just take a look. Wow, wow, wow. Look at that wipeout. He kept hoping that the guy would reappear. He did not. That's gotta hurt. Really? Were these people out of their minds? Yes, damn right, that guy had probably just drowned, for the love of Mike. And there were still guys floating boards. It made him kind of sick to think that this story might be drawing more of them down here to this death trap. I spoke with several people earlier who say this is the best surfing they've ever seen in Southern California. We're not on, his cameraman said. We're not on? Not even Bernie would pull this. Nobody would pull this, but they had damn well pulled it. Worrying about ratings and TV and, oh my goodness me, wanting your name out there in lights while people are literally being pounded to death by Mother Earth. People, this is what we have become. We're so desperate to get likes, clicks, subscribe, follow me, that when the disaster finally hits, we don't even notice it's hitting us because we're too wrapped up in the minutiae of ourselves. Oh, yes, we are. Chapter 8. The lowest temperature ever experienced in the United Kingdom was recorded at Braemar. Aye, in the Scottish Islands. Yes, not far from Balmoral. On January the 10th of 1982, it reached minus 17 degrees Fahrenheit. But at a glance at the external temperature, the monitor told the RAF Lieutenant Scott Harrow that it must be far below that on the ground right now. Minus 44 at 1,800 feet meant that it probably was around minus 35 on the ground. Holy moly, that is cold! Woohoo! It must be an ungodly cold in the Balmoral Castle. That's where they're headed, by the way. The Royals had got snowed in and the heating system had failed. Has it really? This, extraordinarily enough, was a rescue mission to pull the Queen and her spectacularly grumpy husband, Prince Philip. Well, Whitley, you've got that bit right. Prince Philip was notoriously grumpy. Anyway, they're going to get them out of a very dangerous situation. One did not think of them as really old until you saw them up close. Scott, as a member of the Queen's flight, had been close to them many times, and they were frail old people in very nice clothes. That's one way of describing the royal family. Look at those cars, they're not moving, his co-pilot said. I think the diesel would have frozen in the tanks at that point, and definitely the petrol. Everybody in those cars would have been dead from asphyxiation. Sadly. The chopper was passing over the A93, the old military road that connected through the Royal Deeside. Scott gazed down at the long line of vehicles. It looked as if the entire town of Braemar was trying to convoy out. Yes, but they died. And it looked as if they were snowbound. That was death down there. Probably a lot of it. Yes, I would say every car. Radio headquarters tell them to send somebody out to check on it. I think that's a lesson in futility, but radio them anyway. It was getting damn cold in the helicopter, despite its heating system, and Scott could see why. They were at -52. Flight Officer Williams said, "This can't be right." But his gauge and Scott agreed, -58. Now the stick became sluggish. What the hell is going on? A spider web of cracks appeared on Scott's external temperature gauge. It was connected to an external pilot tube, which would be directing a thin stream of outside air onto its measuring filament. Obviously, the temperature inside the instruments was dropping below its tolerance minimums. Of course it is. The stick was not properly responsive. Scott was a little afraid, frankly. It was not a good sign. This sort of control issue. Instinct made him glance again out the window. This was no place to attempt a counter-rotation landing. Williams yelled, "The bloody hydraulic fluid is starting to freeze." Yes, at that temperature it would. A moment later, a Christmas tree of lights, not a Christmas tree, please understand, yes. It was a Christmas tree of warning lights, began flashing. Everything that required hydraulic pressure was beginning to malfunction. I got foot by stairs, you don't say. Hydraulic fluid freezes at -150 degrees Fahrenheit. Scott tried to reduce altitude on the theory that he might get a slightly higher temperature closer to the ground. Pan, pan, pan. Royal 2 Flight 0 flight controls are not responsive, he said into his microphone, attempting auto-rotation. Yes. We're going in. Repeat, this is Royal 2-0. We're going down, men. We're going down. He heard the voice of a safety start. Your fuel pressure has dropped below the required safety limit. Please correct this condition. Your fuel pressure, no. He hauled the stick back, and with every ounce of strength in his body, nothing whatsoever happened. He heard the beginning of the crash, a long sighing crackle as the fuselage went skidding along the steel-hard surface of the snow. That was the last thing he ever heard. The other two choppers in the flight closed position. Squadron leader Wilfred Tyne was appalled at what he had just seen. Scott and Willie had plunged out of the air like a bloody stone. They had not lived. No. Usually that happens when you fall out the sky like a bloody stone. He knew that. He'd seen the aircraft break up on the impact. There was no smoke back there, though, meaning that it hadn't exploded. No. You need heat to explode something. It's a bit of a gift. Which was very odd, considering that all 3 helicopters were fully fueled for the trip out here and back, given that Balmoral's fuel depot might not be operating if the power generators had all failed. Suddenly, he heard Chopper 3 sing out. "Port engine, pressure dropping," the pilot shouted. "Attempt relight on 1. They damn well lost an engine, and Wilfred knew why. These helicopters were below their operational minimums on temperature. They were freezing to death. Yes, they were. He saw Chopper 3 fall back, wobbling in the sky. Then he heard, "Flame out!" on starboard engine as well. He began circling. His 3rd chopper dropped. Then a fairly good counter-rotation started. They got it back under a semblance of control. Excellent! They were going to at least be able to make a crash landing. Then he saw the rotor slowly just stop moving. No rotation, no counter-rotation, nothing. For a long second the helicopter hung motionless, as if it was taking a moment for it to realise that it had to drop. It fell away gracefully, drifting lazily to one side and then plummeting towards the ground. It disappeared in a spray of snow. He'd just lost his flight. He was too stunned to grasp it. 6 men were dead, and the rescue mission was now in a shambles. Well, that's Britain for you, darlings. Then his own instrument panel began flashing. Emergencies. Entering auto-rotation, he said. Select emergency fuel. Emergency fuel selected on both. Wilfred pressed the collective lever. He might as well have been pressing on a brick in a wall for all the movement that he got. Come on, you bastard! He could not lose his whole flight. Then what the bloody hell would happen to the Queen? What will happen to the Queen? My goodness me! Come on! Selecting manual pilot override. Using all his strength, he managed to keep the chopper under sort of control as it descended. A quick glance told him the altimeter was unwinding in a blur. He fought the wings, seeking to get some kind of diarrhea going, feeling just the slightest response of air pressure on the over-twisting blow, rotor blades increasing. Oh dear, dear, dear. Then there was a sharp bang, followed but once by a terrific jolt to the left, then a ferocious tumbling that never seemed to end. Blimey! When it was over, there was a movement inside the twisted airframe. A moment later, a broken door fell off into the snow with a dull thud, and Wilfred, our darling Wilfred, climbed out. He stood in his shredded flight suit, staring off down a long snow-choked vale. Was that smoke down there? Perhaps a wisp of it was coming from a house otherwise buried in the drifts. He started down. As the shock of the crash wore off, he realised that his thigh was burning. It felt like coals were being pressed against him. Instinctively, he clutched at the rip in his flight suit that was letting in the super cold air. But it was too late. Far too late. He kept plodding, but his movements slowed. He was so cold that his sensations failed him. It didn't feel as though he was freezing, but as though he was burning. That's classic, actually. When you're so cold, you feel as though you're boiling. He came to a stop. He knew that this had happened, but distantly, the way a man knows a thing in a dream. Then he knew no more. He'd frozen solid, a stick of gum still in his mouth, like the mammoths of Alaska so long ago. but they had been chewing daisies, and Wilfred favoured double mint. The wind came across the vale, howling down out of the north, drawing graceful snow ghosts with it across the ridges and around the hilltops. It hit Wilfred in the face, causing his helmet plastic visor to shatter. Wilfred swayed in the wind, then toppled back when his body hit the chopper's exposed left landing gear. It shattered like glass, falling to the ground in pieces. In time they would be reduced to bones, a strange scattering of limbs, head and torso. But first there would be snow, racing, tumbling out of the sky, smothering the crash site beneath a blanket of white and silence. Well, that's the end of the UK. That's the end of Queenie Bobs and Grumpy Prince Philip. The end of it all, my dears. Car radios were playing and folks were getting out, standing beside their vehicles, their belongings piled on top and in trunks, their kids jamming the back seats. Many of them had cats and dogs and birds and every kind of pet as well. These were Americans. In this evacuation, people with no experience of being refugees. There were cars with things like bar stools and remote-controlled model aeroplanes. Not to mention televisions, video game consoles, computers, and all manner of other things that would be profoundly useless to a refugee. Pound for pound, there was probably as much sports gear as there was food in those cars. Half an hour ago, the radios were saying, Mexican officials closed the border in response to the overwhelming number of American refugees heading south. Or with the computer consoles and bar stools. Go figure. Some people shouted and shook their fists. Wow, 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 wow. But many more abandoned their cars and took to the walkways, climbing down and attempting to get over the fence that blocked the Rio Grande. Oh, the irony! That's all I have to say on that. The most athletic of them made it, some even with a few possessions that went swimmingly out into the flooding, uneasy water. Struggling for the far side with the backpacks and suitcases floating around them. Normally, the Rio Grande was a slow river, often not even flowing. But today, to the day of days, it was a steady, and from the darkness that scarred the northern horizon, it looked like it would be flooded soon. Unless, of course, it also froze. Well, there's every possibility because we're going into an ice age. If you're in the river, you're going to freeze with it. Washington was experiencing a full-scale blizzard. There was nothing abnormal about it yet. It was simply very intense. But the city was functioning with a skeleton crew of police and National Guard troops out to prevent looting and protect the national monument. Protecting national monuments in a time of crisis. Oh my! 6 of those men were destined to lose their lives at the top of the Washington Monument when the cold touched it, like many others, to die in the Capitol, in the various official structures in the streets. Alone among all the federal structures, only the White House blazed with light. Well, that's probably because they have independent generators. You know, the White House is rather special. Alone among all the federal structures, only the White House blazed with light. Inside it was warm and very quiet, with only the faintest whispers of falling snow, and an occasional wail from the wind as it compressed against the eaves of the private apartments on the upper floor. Also alone, having sent his Secret Service personnel south, President of the United States sat at his executive desk. The building was on its own power and fuel, so he had closed off the largely ceremonial Oval Office. Vice President Becker and Secretary of State burst in. They had been in the cabinet room, which had become a sort of state headquarters. The President gave them a cold look. He could not help but feel that Becker had betrayed him by scoffing at his man Hall. He should have at least given the President the opportunity to decide for himself. Like most presidents, he was almost hurt by mistakes made not by him, but on his behalf. He raised his eyebrows. Becker puffed himself up. It looked like he was about to yell. The Mexicans have closed the border. Blake had been expecting that. Have you spoken to the Mexican ambassador? He's dead, the secretary said. A tree fell on his car. Oh, my. Mr. President, can we open the border by force if we want to? General Pierce appeared as if on command, which was probably exactly what had happened, the President thought. What are your contingency plans, General? We already have the Third Corps out of the Fort Hood on Threatcon Delta, sir. Ready to go? Have you lost your minds? Secretary Lynn yelled. We're facing the largest ecological disaster in human history, and you're talking about going to war? Needs must, love. Needs must. We're talking about survival, the Vice President bellowed. The President thought, I must never have another shouter on my ticket. Shouting is always a sign of weakness. Becker continued, when resources become scarce, nations go to war. Well, at least we can agree on that one, eh, Becker? Yes, the President thought, that had been old Tojo's approach. He'd sent the Imperial Japanese Navy to Pearl Harbor because we'd cut off his oil. What about sovereignty? The Secretary said. It's their sovereign right to close their border. America was built on land stolen from the Indians. So was Mexico, for that matter. The only claim nations have on the land they hold is force. Well, yes. So, if you fancy an adventure with The Day After Tomorrow, want to feel your blood freeze in your very own body and your soul with it, then may I recommend The Day After Tomorrow as absolute disaster porn that it is. Oh, yes, you are going to love it, my darlings. Every salacious last bit. End of the world never looked so fun. Oh, my. Yes, will we make it? If you've seen the movie, you probably already know. Anyway, my darlings, I will leave it there for day 3 of Advent Adventure. What will I come back with in day 4? Who knows? Well, if you like what I've done, you can always give me a thumbs up. And if you really like what I've done, you can always subscribe and come back tomorrow for more daring adventures with the fairy. And even Monty might be here. See you later. Bye-bye.